Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Not argue policy. You will always lose. Morality always beats policy. It's why Republicans lose. Right? When they argue that it's immoral for you not to be nicer to the poor, and you argue, yes, but your policies are ineffective. Okay? Immoral beats ineffective in an argument any day. Any day. So when it comes to purely moral issues, social issues like abortion, to get more specific, the reality is that abortion is not a complex issue. It's a very simple issue. That's either a life or it isn't. It's that simple. If it's a life, you can't kill it. If it's not a life, you can do whatever you want. It's a kidney, right? So, and then it becomes, okay, so how do we define life? And the answer to me is you define life by the same way that you would define life if you found it on Mars, right? If you found a single-celled organism on Mars, it's a life, right? I know, as somebody who has one baby and another on the way, you know, that what's in there is not a random piece of tissue. At the very least, even if you don't believe it's a life yet, it's certainly a potential human life. And that seems to be more valuable than your convenience. And there's something nasty and cruel and degrading about the idea that you get to decide whether something is a life or not based on whether it's convenient to you or because it's in your body. By the way, this is exactly, it truly is amazing, actually, how history repeats itself. The argument in favor of abortion is exactly the same as the argument in favor of slavery. Exactly the same, right? You're on my land. I get to decide. It's up to me to decide whether you're a person or property. It's up to me, right? What are you going to say? It's on my land. What are you going to do about it?
And I'm someone that believes that certainly the unborn child has rights. I believe that the mother has rights. I simply happen to be a person, and some believe that those mothers' rights deem to usurp those rights. But certainly it's not to disrespect.
In what world would any of my rights allow me to kill another human being?
Well, if you got rid of all those things, if you got rid of government involvement, Bernie Sanders would still think that something was wrong if Bill Gates is earning a lot of money and somebody at the bottom is earning none. Yeah. He sees somebody in a room with $5 and somebody with $1, and he immediately says the guy with $5 must have stolen something from the guy with $1. Whereas I say I have no evidence of that until you show me that evidence. Maybe the guy with $5 produced more than the guy with $1. Here's the truth. The left is more dangerous than ISIS. The reason the left is more dangerous than ISIS is because ISIS can't succeed without their appeasement and help. Right? ISIS, President Obama was wrong when he labeled them the JV team because he promptly made them the non-JV team. Right? The fact is that the left is behind the rise of ISIS. Right? It doesn't matter. They can't destroy us without the left helping them along. They can't. They can't without the left pretending radical Islam doesn't exist or releasing transcripts of jihadist phone calls with the religion and Allah omitted. Right? They can't destroy us without Obama removing troops from Iraq and slashing the military, or Hillary Clinton declaring war in Libya and then leaving Americans to die in Benghazi because she's a vicious pile of nastiness piled 5'7" high. Right? The fact is that the left, if you're not fighting the left, you're doing it wrong. So if we say that ISIS is our worst enemy, that's not true. Leftism is our worst enemy because they're the ones who are going to allow ISIS to win. On the gun control debate, they keep trotting out children as though we should be taking policy prescriptions from 7-year-olds. You know, it used to be in this country that when a president of the United States said, I'm dealing with this issue because, for example, my 13-year-old daughter cares about nuclear disarmament, we laughed them. We laughed at them. We laughed them out of the public sphere. Jimmy Carter comes to mind. When President Obama walks out there with a bunch of 7-year-olds and says, I'm doing it because these 7-year-olds, they care about gun control, give me a break. I mean, if we're taking our policy prescriptions from kids who can't spell either policy or prescription, we have a problem.
Earlier tonight, you said that Asians are the most prosperous ethnicity in America. By what metric are they by
income.
Really?
Yes.
What source?
Well, I mean, that was true as of the census tract from 2010.
Yeah. According to what source do they have the highest income?
Census.gov.
Thank you. And also, you said earlier that there's a poll that shows that black people think black people are racist.
Rasmussen poll 2013.
Thank you very much.
You know, honestly, Piers, you've kind of been a bully on this issue because what you do, and I've seen it repeatedly on your show, I watch your show, and I've seen it repeatedly, what you tend to do is you tend to demonize people who differ from you politically by standing on the graves of the children of Sandy Hook, saying they don't seem to care enough about the dead kids. If they cared more about the dead kids, they would agree with you on policy. I think we can have a rational political conversation about balancing rights and risks and rewards of all of these different policies, but I don't think that what we need to do is demonize people on the other side as being unfeeling about what happened in Sandy Hook.
How dare you accuse me of standing on the graves of the children that died there? How dare you?
I've seen you do it repeatedly, Piers.
Like I say, how dare you?
I mean, you can keep saying that, but you've done it repeatedly. What you do, and I've seen you do it on the program, is you keep saying to folks that if they disagree with you politically, then somehow this is a violation of what happened in Sandy Hook. And you have yet, I'd really like to hear your policy prescriptions for what we should do about guns. Because you say that you respect the Second Amendment, and, you know, I brought this here for you so that you can read it. It's the Constitution. And I would really like for you to explain to me what you would do about guns that would have prevented what happened in Sandy Hook.
Do you think transgender is a real thing?
I mean, I don't know what that means. Do I think it's a real thing? I think there are people who suffer from a mental illness and believe that they are members of the opposite sex. I do not believe they are actually members of the opposite sex, because I think that is biologically impossible.
Okay, but you can now see why some people might say that you are espousing views that wouldn't be unsimilar in the KKK. It'd be fair to say the KKK would hold a similar view.
That's insane. I'm sorry. That's plainly insane. If the KKK thinks that the sky is blue, and the sky happens to be blue, that doesn't mean I'm a KKK sympathizer if I say the sky is blue.
Given that there is unconscious bias, how does white privilege...
Number one, when I speak about white privilege... Yes, so when I speak about white privilege, I'm speaking specifically about behavior. Okay, there have been no studies, and really I've looked at these studies, the connection between what they call implicit bias, this is their favorite phrase now, implicit bias, unconscious bias, and biased behavior has yet to be proven at any level that is even remotely necessary to be used in, for example, a courtroom, which is why it's never been used in a courtroom. It is also true that there is no way, there really isn't, there's been no proven way to alleviate what they call unconscious bias, which means that we're ghost hunting. So what I would suggest is that if there is unconscious bias, and I'll acknowledge the possibility or the reality of unconscious bias, if there is, then I need you to I don't care about what's in people's heads so much as what they do. So if you point me to a racist behavior, don't worry, I'll let you respond. If you point me to a racist behavior, I'm happy to stand alongside you and protest it. What I can't do is protest about things in people's head that I don't know about because I'm not a mind reader.
Okay, so that's a really interesting response, and to that I have two questions. Firstly, what I've heard you say that this is something that, you know, the way people think doesn't affect their behavior. So that's the first thing you've said. So I'm really curious if you can kind of give me another example of a thought that somebody has which doesn't affect their behavior. Like, do people who, you know, support Trump not vote for him? Like, I'm very curious about that.
Yes.
And secondly, so the second thing that I want to ask is that if it's something that's hard to fix, does it mean we shouldn't do anything about it? Because you said, oh, I don't know if we can change how people think. Does that mean we shouldn't try?
I mean, first of all, not a great impression. But beyond that, my voice isn't that low. But beyond that, as far as the first question, which is, do people have thoughts that don't manifest in behavior? Yes, all the time.
For instance?
For instance, every thought that you have about walking up here and strangling me right now. I assume like we have thoughts all the time that don't manifest in behavior, and this is true every single day. We consider thoughts that cross our minds. And the problem with unconscious bias is the idea is you don't even know that you're having the thought, right? So how can you stop it if you don't even know that you're having it? But then we should be able to gauge the unconscious bias and its impact on behavior. That's why it's unconscious bias as opposed to conscious bias. The idea behind unconscious bias is that it's not even a ghost, it's a ghost of a ghost, because you don't even know you're having the thought. So people, the whole idea behind diversity training is the idea that you can retrain people to stop their chain of thought in order so that it doesn't manifest in behavior. I don't think that every thought manifests in behavior. If it did, then every time a man saw a good-looking woman walk down the street, a straight man saw a good-looking woman down the street, we'd have a real mess on our hands. So, you know, the second question, the idea was a little too broad for me to respond to, which is, just because something is tough, don't we have to face up to it? Yes, we have to face up to tough things all the time. And one of the tough things I would suggest that we face up to is that you have a lot more control over your own behavior and the decisions you make than the supposedly widespread unconscious bias of people you've never...
I mean, this is the hilarious thing about the Occupy idiots. They're out there making a big fuss, and they're saying we want jobs commensurate with our education. Right now, they have jobs commensurate with their education. It's called sitting out on the street doing nothing with your life because you're a bunch of liberal arts morons. You got a degree in queer dance theory, and now you expect a $100,000 job somewhere. Sorry, ain't gonna happen.
Well, what I do is I assume that I'm going to get a certain set of questions from folks like you, Brian, that I generally do get and with all the veiled implications therein. Don't you feel persecuted when you go on a leftist network? The implication, of course, being that I see myself as a victim. Don't you feel like when you come on a leftist network and you're being attacked that maybe it's because, you know, you're just a little bit intolerant? These are usually the way these conversations go. So, you know, I'm glad, Brian, that you haven't done all of those things. You've done some of them. The Occupy Wall Street movement was all disenchanted college kids who got out after that lesbian dance theory major and thought they were going to make 6 figures somewhere. And it turns out nobody pays to watch people theorize about lesbian dance. So, you know, so they end up, you know, going and living in tents in Central Park and pooping on themselves.
It was he kicked off his presidential campaign by saying basically he was pitching to the racists in the South, to the, you know, the.
I don't know who I'm being asked to defend here or why I'm being asked to defend them. I'm not, a member of John McCain's staff.
This is the antithesis of this was Ronald Reagan. This is the antithesis of social justice, is dog whistle calls to bigots, basically. But
well, what does this have to do with anything that I'm talking about?
In our
both know
nuclei. Yeah,
chromosomes don't necessarily mean you're male or female.
Gender.
With gender
identity. Go ahead. No, so
especially, but even so, you have a thing like Klinefelter's syndrome. So you don't know what you're talking about. You're not educated on genetics.
Would you like to discuss the genetics? Or
well, no,
what are your genetics?
So I'd stay away from the genetics and back to the brain scans.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion. There's something I like, and it's called science. And science suggests that if you have not a single cell in your body without a Y chromosome, except for your sperm cells, and if you still have all your appendages, and if you still have your twig and berries and all the rest of it, but you call yourself a woman, no. No, and this goes back to my feeling that your subjective view of yourself is completely irrelevant to me. I don't care what you think you are, I just care what you are. All right, we all know Caitlyn Jenner's a man, and we're sitting here pretending Caitlyn Jenner's a woman. And at one point I said to one of the guys on the panel, would you date Caitlyn Jenner? Right, you're a straight guy, would you date Caitlyn Jenner? And the answer, of course, is no, because Caitlyn Jenner still has a penis. Okay? It's the most feminine penis you've ever seen. And it's... And so, you know, I say this, and microaggressions everywhere. And just as I say, microaggressions lead to actual aggression. So what happened is I said this, and this transgender guy sitting next to me, he grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV and says, if you don't cut that out, you'll go home in an ambulance, or I'll send you home in an ambulance. Which is weird, because ambulances don't go home. During the break, Zoe turned to me and said, I'll see you in the parking lot. They'd send security out to the outdoors with me. They'd send him to my car. He was threatening me on Twitter, saying well, he would curb stomp me, etc. Which I have to say is deeply unladylike behavior. And I think the reason that it's about left and right here is because fundamentally the right believes that the basis for the Second Amendment, and they believe in the Second Amendment, the basis for the Second Amendment is not really about self-defense and it's not about hunting. It is about resistance to government tyranny. That's what the founders said, and that's what the right believes in this country.
Which tyranny are you fearing yourself?
I fear the possibility of a tyranny rising in this country in the next 50 to 100 years. Let me tell you something, Piers. The fact that my grandparents and great-grandparents in Europe didn't fear that is why they are now ashes in Europe. So this kind of leftist revisionist history, where there's never any fear of democracy going usurpacious or tyrannical, is just that.
In your video where you debunk white privilege, you talk about how white privilege is a made-up term by privileged minorities. So I was wondering if you can elaborate on some of the privileges that you think minority groups have.
Okay, so in privileges in the law, so when I say privilege, I'm actually going to talk about legal standing. Okay, so affirmative action is a privilege. Affirmative action is a privilege. Subprime mortgages designed to appeal to minority recipients without proper qualifications, that is a privilege. Now, those are a couple examples of privilege. Privilege would also be the police being told that they can't police in communities the same way they would in other communities because they don't understand the problems of minority communities. That's a privilege. By the way, these privileges are not helpful, but these are, as an overall matter, but it is certainly it's very difficult for me to see how it's not a privilege to get a lower score on the SAT than the Asian guy who's living in exactly the same circumstance. He gets penalized 50 points, you get 230 points on the SATs. That is definitionally a privilege. So there's one. Do you disagree?
Yeah, but I don't want to take up everyone's time, so I'm just going to let.
When the SATs were out of 1600, Princeton University found that black folks were being given a bonus of 230 points on average by the top universities in the country. Asians were being penalized by 50 points. But that's fair, because Asians were obviously beneficiaries of Asian privilege. Because our Asian founders wrote an Asian constitution to benefit Asian people. But that all depends on whether the press decides that they hate Hillary. If they decide that they hate Hillary and they can find the bright new young thing, then they'll throw Hillary over in a New York Minute. Unless they've decided that they really love Bill so much that they want Hillary. They can't stand, the press can't stand Hillary. I mean, nobody on the left can really stand Hillary. They love Bill, but they can't stand Hillary. Basically, the press's relationship with Hillary is Bill's relationship with Hillary. Right? They're in a forced marriage, and they don't really like her very much, and they will cheat at the first available opportunity. But, yeah, but they have to be there because, hey, it's Hillary. They just got rid of Larry Wilmore, who's legitimately comedy Ebola. I mean, he just, every time he approaches comedy, he infects.
Hello, everyone. Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane. Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGP TV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man.